The newsagents.
Last night in Southport, a town at the centre of that terrible, terrible stabbing on Monday, police found themselves pelted with bricks and bottles, vans were set alight as hundreds of people gathered, a mob, a riot, outside a mosque after misinformation about the suspect of the Southport attack was spread online.
So today on the Newsagents, we're going to look at the wider picture of whether this is just about Southport or this is about a world of misinformation deliberately spread, designed to cause maximum chaos anywhere in the Western liberal democratic world. And the links go right around the world. Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
And I thought last night in Southport, we saw the very best of humanity and we saw some of the worst. And this morning, as people started clearing up outside the mosque where the EDL had descended, seeing local Southport people joining in to clear up the streets, to clear up the mess that was left behind by the rioters, showed what was good. There had been a vigil that had taken place in the town last night to mourn the 3 girls who were lost and to pray for those who had survived but are still in a critical condition. And then a mob descends on a mosque on the basis of misinformation that maybe the kid who had carried out the 17-year-old was a Muslim, on the basis of crap that had been on the internet.
And it seems almost unconscionable that the mob were attacking the police, the very people who had been first at the scene just one day earlier when those horrific stabbings took place. And last night, the police were trying to hold back a mob. We think it was a mob that had gathered on the basis of misinformation, disinformation spread by bad actors, but including the English Defence League leaders. And they came to the site of this mosque, which had, as far as we're aware, absolutely nothing to do with anything. And they began to hurl rocks and bins and heavy objects at the police who were trying to create a line of safety between them and the mosque. And you will see some of the pictures from that if you go online. There is video of police vans on fire, huge plumes of smoke, police officers injured to the point where one was actually concussed. As you said, I think more than 20 are in hospital, more are injured, and they have just been trying to position themselves between people who wanted to pray peacefully at the mosque and the hardline extremists outside it. And I guess today we want to talk a little bit about how these mobs, how these riots grow up, particularly around incredibly vulnerable communities. What Southport went through on Monday is unimaginable. It was an attack, as far as we know, against little girls and women who came to their rescue in a dance class in the school holidays. None of us can fathom what was at the bottom of that. None of us can begin to work out any kind of motivation. But in the minds of the mob that gathered last night, this is primarily about illegal immigration or about Islam or about terror or about a whole host of things that no one is saying except for them.
There is also something else about it, though, that often the people, the thugs who were there last night, are the ones saying very vocally, we want our country back. We want proper law and order. We want the rule of law to be re-established. The people that are injuring the police officers, the thin blue line that are trying to maintain order.
Yeah.
I mean, does anyone see the contradiction there? And also, I thought, grotesquely hijacking the legitimate concerns, the pain felt by all those people in Southport, that this dance class, as you said, Emily, had been untacked for unfathomable reasons, and just the sense of extraordinary grief being felt. And yet you've got this bloody mob turning up, setting light to things and trying to stone mosque that had nothing to do with it.
Make no mistake, I do not believe this is about any kind of ideology. I believe this is about bad actors trying to monetise their own political cause for the sake of power.
And not surprisingly, the actions of those rioters last night has been roundly condemned by the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, Serena Kennedy.
They were there purely for hooliganism and thuggery in terms of bringing that level of violence and that behaviour onto the streets of Southport, and that's not what this community is about. We saw the very best of that community last night at the vigil. We've seen the very best of this community this morning when they've all been pulling together to support each other, to put right the damage that has been done. That is not what this community is about.
As you've said, we will start in an interview in a moment, joining up the dots between all the other places where we have seen this kind of response to absolute tragedy, community tragedy. And if you want to know who's at the heart of this disinformation, the bad actors, well, you know, you will never believe it when I say that we have heard from a couple of them already on this subject, Andrew Tate and Tommy Robinson. Have a listen.
So an undocumented migrant decided to go into a Taylor Swift dance class today and stab 6 little girls. That's right, somebody arrived in the UK on a boat. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knows where he's from. The media is, of course, hiding the fact that this is a 17-year-old male.
Before anyone starts condemning the angry English men up in Southport, ask yourself this. What do you fucking expect them to do? Yeah? What message have our police force sent? They run away in Leeds. You're going to bring total anarchy to this country.
Let's not forget that Tommy Robinson led the charge in Rotherham over 12 years ago over the child abuse scandal there, where he used it as a way of inciting Islamophobia with the English Defence League. And Andrew Tate, as we speak, is wanted on allegations of human trafficking. That's worth bearing in mind when you hear him talk about women and girls.
Someone else who has contributed to the debate, inverted commas, is the MP for Clacton, Nigel Farage, who wasn't in Parliament yesterday, where he could have asked a question about it. But he was on social media and he posted this clip, which I think we need to deconstruct at the other end of it.
Well, it's pretty horrendous. The third young girl has died as a result of the stabbings yesterday in Southport. I obviously join everybody in my horror at what has happened. I know the Prime Minister went to lay flowers and was heckled, and it shows you how unhappy the public are with the state of law and order in our country. I have to say there are one or two questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question. What I do know is something is going horribly wrong in our once beautiful country.
Some of the questions that Nigel Farage raises in themselves are not illegitimate. You know, was this person
They're completely
being
legit.
watched?
You know, when is a terror incident a terror incident? It's all terrorist in a way.
Yeah, and also, you know, was this person under observation or not? We'll get to find out. But he knows that at this stage of the investigation, the police are not able to say that stuff. You cannot identify someone who is under the age of 18. There is an investigation going on. No charges have been brought. And the bit that I think really sticks in the craw for me about what Nigel Farage said there was, I wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. No, it's not being withheld from us. The police are conducting an investigation and they don't, as a matter of rule, give you a running commentary on everything that they're looking into and every line of investigation, because that would compromise any investigation that the police ever did. He knows better than that.
Yeah.
But it gives rise to conspiracy theory. If you think, powerful elites are withholding information from people like you and me.
Look, the withholding information trope is one of the very first pages of the populist playbook, which is you are being denied knowledge that the elites have. You know, they're not telling you about the COVID vaccine. They're not telling you about 5G mobile masts. They're not telling you about all these things that are coming out to get you and kill you. And I think the trouble is that actually you're right. He's asking totally legitimate questions that we all have about whether somebody can act like this without being monitored by, you know, police or by mental health or by social services, whatever. Those are all legitimate questions. But the moment you turn it into you're being denied knowing the truth, you basically open the door to disinformation, which is why you get all this stuff coming online. And I have to say, I'm not going to mention the tweets or the accounts or whatever, but at 4:00 on Monday, I looked at Twitter and I saw something that claimed that the suspect, the attacker, was an illegal immigrant who'd come into the country on a small boat last year and was known to the Liverpool mental health services. And I just looked at that one tweet and I thought, there is too much information on that. I cannot believe that. You know, something triggered in me. There was too much knowledge in that one thing, and it had a Muslim name. There was too much information in it, and it purported to tell a story that we couldn't possibly know that quickly. And actually, at that point, you just want to step back and say, what am I reading? What am I seeing? Who stands to gain? Cui bono? Who is pushing all this stuff out? And quite often, it is people who stand to gain monetarily or through influence or through power.
Yes, and you have to let the police be able to get on with doing their job. I'm not Inspector Knacker of the Yard, neither are you. We've got to let the police do their job in the best way that they can to try to establish the sequence of events, who knew what and when. That is their job, not our job. We're not amateur sleuths who get in the way now of the police doing their job. And if we believe in law and order, let the forces of law and order behave. But I do wonder whether there is something much bigger, and this makes me sound like a conspiracy theory, except that there is quite a lot of evidence to suggest that it's true, that there is interference from state actors who are not taking one side or the other. They're not pro-Muslim or anti-Muslim. What they want to do is to get pro-Muslim and anti-Muslim at each other's throats.
Yeah.
And that is the name of the game.
Dissent.
Dissent, sow discord, sow disharmony, because that undermines the pillars of your democracy. In the 2016 US presidential election, every American intelligence agency came up with the same conclusion, that the Russian state was there to sow disinformation to the American public so that it would exacerbate anger, exacerbate conflict, and sow discord among the American people. And you'd have to say, very effectively.
Yeah. Well, don't take it from us. We're going to talk after the break to a disinformation expert, Mark Owen-Jones, who has written extensively about what he calls disinfluencers.
The astonishing thing is that it's tempting to think that what happened in Southport last night was sort of made in
righteous
Southport.
anger or
righteous
something.
anger, or whatever you want
Yeah.
to call it, of these people were concerned and they thought that it was a Muslim. You've just got to join up some dots here.
Yeah.
Because actually the dots lead you to all sorts of weird and wonderful places where the same people who are tweeting about what was happening in Southport are tweeting about things that are happening in Australia or America.
Yeah, and we should say at this point that the police and the locals do not think that the rioters last night, the mob last night, was made up of Southport people at all. They think they were bussed in specifically to cause havoc on a vulnerable community.
Well, we're joined now by Mark Owen-Jones, who is an expert on disinformation and misinformation. And you should read what he has posted on X, where he's done a very long thread today on Southport and kind of going far wider than that. Mark, it's great to have you with us. It's not just about Southport, is it? It seems to be there are people out there who trade in misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, I call them disinfluencers, which is basically people who are influencers who routinely share disinformation. Every time there's a big event, especially a sort of a tragedy, we saw the same when there were stabbings in Sydney, there are people out there who use that opportunity to spread disinformation, and it's often racist or xenophobic disinformation.
And I guess that's the point, isn't it, Mark? At the heart of what they are doing is a monetization. I mean, this is about money and about power, right? This isn't people getting things wrong online. It is much more organized than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where it gets more sinister. And that's what disinformation is. It's deliberately spreading false news for, as you said, either power or money. And there are plenty of people out there who know by spreading sensational claims, they will get a lot of clicks and they will make a lot of people angry. One important thing to remember, especially in the social media age, is that the thing that gets the most clicks and shares is stuff that makes you laugh or stuff that makes you angry. And of course, they're going for stuff that makes you angry. And I think what's disturbing about this in particular is that social media companies in particular are making money, but not offering any transparency about who's behind these accounts much of the time, right? It's easy to set up an account and spread disinformation, make money without actually vetting or verifying who you are.
Just can I ask you something? You talked about an incident in Australia, in Sydney. There was a stabbing at Bondi Junction shopping centre, and there was suddenly misinformation. It was not long after October the 7th. A Jewish kid is suddenly identified with a name who has nothing whatsoever to do with it, and the heavens open around him. Now, are you saying that the same people who were responsible for something that happened 10,000 miles away online are the same people who are putting stuff up about what's been happening in Southport?
Many of them are the same people. There's a sort of global, forget the term, right-leaning, often either anti-Semitic or Islamophobic, who will look at an event in any place in the world and weaponize it. So there's some accounts out there, news accounts like Visegrad 24, for example. One of the ones I mentioned in my thread, Europe Invasion, which is a fake account using a repurposed Twitter account. They will jump on any event like this, particularly if it's an event that they can use to, for example, target a particular minority group. Doesn't matter where it is, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in Southport. It's a global transnational attempt to try and demonize minorities.
Well, let me go a step further to ask a slightly separate question, whether it is authoritarian regimes who wish to use this to sow seeds of doubt and dissent within Western liberal democratic societies where people are much more vulnerable. It's a free press. You get all this information and people go to the extremes. And, you know, we saw it in 2016 with the Trump election campaign, where some of it was pro-Trump, some of it was violently anti-Trump, but the idea was to just get American people at each other's throats.
I mean, this is the classic playbook, particularly when it comes to Russia. We know that these what is called active measures exploit polarization and divisions within society to try and turn society against each other, to weaken it on the international stage. I think one of the best examples that was documented, that was connected to the Internet Research Agency, which was the Russia-based disinformation network linked to Putin, was that they organized on the same day, at the same time, on opposite sides of the street, anti-Muslim protest and a protest sympathetic to Muslims, right? Literally the same organization had organized a rally and a counter rally on opposite sides of the state to drive dissent. The objective is, as I mentioned, is to create division within society, to weaken society, to promote internal conflict, because again, a divided society is much weaker than a united one. And when we look at things like Brexit and the nature of Brexit, regardless of how we got to that point, it could be argued that Brexit was very polarizing, and the net result to leave the EU was something that benefited an adversary like Russia.
Mark, can I take you back to where you started, which was pinpointing what happened in Southport as the product of essentially a very vulnerable community. And this is part of the playbook, that you wait for some horrific tragedy to affect people. And of course, what we all remember is there was a poignancy and a real, I guess, sense of grief and tragedy and coming together in the vigil that was held in Southport last night at 6:00. And then suddenly this crowd emerged on top to attack the mosque. And it reminded me, in a way, of the child abuse scandal in Rotherham that we saw over a decade ago, which is a sense of coming into something, to a place which is already feeling absolutely stricken and shocked and sort of, wrenched to its core. And I guess one of the questions I'm asking is what we heard then and what was, I guess, repeated last night was this idea of they are not telling you stuff. This idea that authorities are withholding stuff from the people. And it's incredibly powerful, isn't it? Because suddenly everyone joins in by telling us what they don't know, or
Right.
by inventing stuff. This idea of they're not telling you stuff, I wonder how authorities should respond to that.
This is the underpinnings of conspiracy theories. It's the absence of knowledge and the perception that there are a powerful group of people, or a government, who are not providing the whole truth. We saw this with COVID, and it's very easy because we know there's many times where governments or authorities have withheld information for various reasons, and that adds, fuel to this fire. But I think in this particular case, it's true, the authorities do not release certain bits of information, but there's reasons for that, and sometimes those reasons are legal reasons, and those legal reasons exist various protections. One of the reasons, for example, the attacker couldn't be named was because his age meant that legally he could not be named. That was then used to sort of say, why are they hiding that? And I think it is important to give the public information. At the same time, I think one has to be careful about being baited into a situation where you're exacerbating the problem. And the example I want to use is that the speculation about the ethnic origins of the attacker was one thing. And in order to put some of the misinformation at bay, or the disinformation, for example, that his name was Ali al-Shakati, who doesn't exist, was to claim, is to say that, he comes from parents who were originally from Rwanda. And then, for example, in the BBC, they said, it's been reported that his parents from Rwanda. Is that information necessary? Ultimately, it probably would not be. But because people have made such a kind of commotion about the origins, the BBC almost has to correct the record by saying, well, he's not a Muslim and he's XYZ. He was born in Cardiff from these parents, to give that information. But by doing that, you're also playing.
So we're being led into it. We're basically being pulled into the game. Yeah.
Right. And so I do think people will weaponize this notion of information being withheld without contextualizing in the legal framework. And they will use that. And honestly, there's very little one can do. And one has to be careful, especially as a journalist or news organization, of falling into that trap, because ultimately, I think that exacerbates it. Now what everyone's saying is, we told you so. We told you what? You told us what? There was all sorts of theories.
Mark, I think you almost answered the question there, and I kind of feel stupid asking it. But is there anything that can be done? 2016, I was in Washington. I was reporting on the fake stuff that was coming out about Hillary Clinton and the Pope backs Donald Trump. And you're just saying, well, this is absolute utter nonsense.
But just because we all know it, we haven't stopped it.
But
right?
It still goes on, and the social media companies either seem unwilling or incapable of doing anything about it.
Right? I mean, they're getting richer on it.
Well, there is no silver bullet, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing that, but it's true. But I think every problem, and there's multiple problems within this, as I said, supply chains of disinformation that need to be addressed. So just one example, as I mentioned, if you have a company working out of London that profits off creating fake accounts for clients, should you then have some sort of policy that outlaws that? Should you have media literacy for people to become more aware of how information spreads on social media? I think all these things are necessary, but primarily when it comes to digital platforms are not doing enough. They are corporations. They make money off monetizing content and data. And frankly, they are not doing enough. And we've seen this particularly on X, which many, I'm sure you've seen, have called a cesspit, not sexpit, since Elon Musk took over, although that too, he's permitted porn bots, but that's a whole different thing. And for example, change the verification system. So now anyone can pay for verification regardless of their identity and have their content algorithmically boosted. So you can pay for propaganda essentially. So social media companies aren't just not doing enough. They're actively making it more difficult to maintain information integrity, to give us a good public sphere.
Let me ask you one question, which I think our listeners will be able to use. If you see something on Twitter that is fake, is it better to call it out and say this is fake? Or is it better just to completely leave it because you don't want to amplify it? Because half the problem is that you're reading stuff over and over again by people calling out the stuff that is fake so that it's not amplified, but it is.
Good question. One, it depends, but also I would generally say don't retweet because regardless of what you're doing, you're amplifying something. If it's a photo and you want to say it's fake, include, for example, a graphic on the photo saying it's fake, because people might just take the photo, circulate it without the graphic saying it's fake, and perpetuate it, right? So there's different techniques, but generally speaking, I would say if they don't belong to a credible organization, don't share it, because ultimately, and this is a question we don't ask enough, why do we share things? We don't really get a benefit. So, if in doubt, don't share and don't retweet.
We're kind of unlearning all the lessons of our childhood.
Yeah, exactly.
Or our social
Don't share.
pendant. Don't speak to a stranger in the street. Don't retweet a stranger online.
Mark Owen Jones, really good to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
I just laughed when he said don't share, because the thing that you grew up with...
Don't talk to a stranger.
Don't talk to a stranger. Yeah, because actually, in a sense, I mean, that is what Twitter is about, isn't it? It's eavesdropping onto lots of conversations, most of which you wouldn't spend 1 second of your normal life listening to. I mean, you try and shut those conversations out, and yet, isn't it funny on social media? We take ourselves down rabbit holes that really we shouldn't be touching at all.
I do think that the whole idea of media literacy is almost a subject that ought to be on the curriculum in schools.
I'm sure it is.
There was a kind of time when it was teaching citizenship, and so how to be a good citizen and participating in democracy and all the rest of it. I think there equally needs to be something now, because in an age where people get their information from so many different sources, and it's not just the family sits in front of the BBC News or ITV News or whatever.
But it's not the kids. It's not our young. No. It's us. It's our age. It's people who put their whole lives online and are very susceptible to what we then read there.
Before we go, we have 2 words to say to you, which are thank you.
Thank you for our 100 million downloads, all of you who have listened. It's an incredible milestone for us. Unless it was just one person who's listened 100 million times.
Wow.
My mum. I'm going to check.
Yeah, you should
Linda?
Ask her.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
Very, very busy. But thank you, because we have reached that number in the short space of...
Well, under 2 years.
Under 2 years. And we thought to say thank you, we would play you out with our, Eurovision greatest hits.
Also known as Emily being beaten up in America.
It's better than getting beaten up by you lot here at home. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis. It's John.
Welcome to the Newsagents. Because you don't believe you can win at the ballot box.
You are just a sad case of a human being, and I'm so sorry for you. I actually think you need your head examined.
It was right that I came.
Right for who?
I have friends. I don't know whether you do or not.
3 strategies in 11 months. You haven't got a strategy.
In America, they want to deregulate everything except for women's bodies.
Allow kids to take on courses which aren't necessarily practical and vocational.
The government didn't cause COVID.
I'm a human being, right? Don't interrupt me.
It's not a matter of left or right, it's a matter of probing your position.
It has nothing to do with Davos.
No, but Davos...
I don't want to get gloomy about the fact that we have the Andrew Tates of the world. I mean, we do have so much good that's happened exactly as you say.
I'm not here to tell you that I agree with everything that Joe Biden has done or is doing.
Macron has said, I dare you, the French... And Harry Kane has just scored. This is very odd.
Media mogul Sir Paul Marshall. He has been retweeting and liking some extreme content.
Are you saying that the opinion polls are completely misrepresenting the mood of the country?
People like you who arrive in England
He's going to the one
to Rwanda,
Why
in Africa.
Made the decision not to stand in the next general election.
We are in Richmond, Virginia.
One of the states where Nikki Haley could do quite well on Tuesday. That could be extremely disruptive.
I think it all comes back to the money.
This issue is feeling more and more like a powder keg, ready to blow.
Why don't you go talk about Jewish space lasers, and really, why don't you fuck off?
Okay, listen.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.